Alright, so picture this. You've heard of royal families, right? The ones with crowns, castles, and a strange obsession with waving from balconies. Well, today we're talking about a different kind of dynasty, the Ming family. But instead of ruling a country with laws and parliaments, they ruled a slice of the China-Myanmar border with fear, fraud, and a whole lot of illegal activity. They weren't exactly hosting garden parties and cutting ribbons. Their business was crime, and business for a very long time was booming. These guys were one of the so-called four families running the show in a place called Raking, a town in Myanmar's Kokang region that became their personal criminal kingdom. Now, Raking isn't your average sleepy border town. For years, it was more like a real-life Gotham City, but with more humidity and fewer caped crusaders. The Ming family, led by their patriarch Ming, essentially turned this place into the world headquarters for cybercrime. Think of them as the ultimate evil corporation, with a diverse portfolio that included everything from running massive online scam centers to operating illegal casinos, trafficking drugs, and even dabbling in organized prostitution. They weren't just breaking the law, they were rewriting the entire rulebook to suit themselves, creating a lawless zone where anything was possible, as long as it made them money. Their operation wasn't some small-time hustle run out of a basement. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. The numbers are staggering. Reports suggest they raked in over 10 billion yuan, which is about $1.4 billion. That's enough money to make a Silicon Valley CEO blush. They built their empire by exploiting a chaotic, semi-lawless region right on the doorstep of one of the world's biggest economies. They were the kings of a digital underworld, preying on people thousands of miles away, while holding thousands more captive to do their dirty work. It was a perfectly dark and twisted business model that thrived in the shadows for far too long. So, when we talk about the Ming family, don't think of nobility and public service. Think of a ruthless mafia clan that built a fortress of crime on an international border. They were the architects of a massive human trafficking and fraud machine that caused misery on a global scale. Their story is a wild ride involving governments, rebel armies, and a digital scamdemic that swept across Southeast Asia. And like all good crime stories, this one eventually leads to a dramatic downfall. But before we get to the courtroom finale, we need to understand just how this family built their house of cards. So how does a family go from being just another name to becoming the godfathers of a cross-border criminal empire? Well, the Mings were smart, or rather, criminally opportunistic. They started building their power base around 2015, taking advantage of the instability in Myanmar's Kokang region. This area has a long history of conflict and weak governance, making it the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. It's like setting up a lemonade stand in a desert. You're the only game in town. The Mings established themselves as one of the four powerful clans that basically ran the place, carving out their territory and setting their own rules. Their main business was the scamdemic, a term the United Nations coined for the explosion of online fraud centers across Southeast Asia. The Ming family became masters of this dark art. They built massive compounds that looked more like fortresses or prisons than office buildings. Inside, they forced tens of thousands of people, many of whom were tricked into coming, to run sophisticated online scams. These weren't your classic Nigerian prince emails. We're talking about elaborate schemes, from fake investment platforms to romance scams, all designed to drain the bank accounts of unsuspecting victims around the world, especially in China. Their operation was vast, efficient, and incredibly cruel. But the scams were just the tip of the iceberg. The Ming family diversified their criminal portfolio like a seasoned Wall Street investor. They ran glitzy, illegal casinos that attracted gamblers and served as a perfect front for money laundering. If you lost your money at the tables, you might be offered a job in the scam centers to pay off your debt, trapping you in their system. They were also deeply involved in drug trafficking, moving narcotics across the porous border. And to complete their trifecta of terror, they ran organized prostitution rings, further exploiting vulnerable people caught in their web. It was a one-stop shop for vice and villainy. This wasn't just a family business, it was a well-oiled machine of corruption. Ming, the family head, was not just a crime boss. He was also a local political figure with ties to the Myanmar military junta. This gave him a cloak of legitimacy and protection, allowing his criminal enterprises to flourish without interference. He was playing both sides, acting as a government official by day and a kingpin by night. This dual role made the Ming family untouchable for years, allowing them to expand their operations and become one of the most feared and powerful criminal syndicates in the entire region. Imagine a city built almost entirely on crime. That was Laokai under the influence of the Ming family and their counterparts. The town transformed from a simple border crossing into the glittering, chaotic capital of the global scam industry. From the outside, parts of it might have looked modern, with tall buildings and flashy lights. But behind the facade, it was a city of traps. It was marketed to young people in China and other countries as a place of high-paying jobs in tech or customer service. Recruiters would post enticing ads online, promising good salaries, free accommodation, and an exciting life. For many, it sounded like a dream opportunity. The reality, however, was a nightmare. Once these hopeful workers arrived in Laokai, their dream turned into a prison sentence. Their passports were confiscated, and they were told they owed the company a massive debt for their travel and training. The high-paying job was a lie. Instead, they were forced to work 12 to 15 hours a day, running online scams under the constant watch of armed guards. They were given scripts and targets, forced to deceive people day in and day out. Resisting or failing to meet quotas resulted in brutal punishments. The entire city was designed to lure people in and never let them go. The local economy became completely dependent on this criminal ecosystem. The casinos, hotels, and restaurants all catered to the industry. The money flowing in from scams and gambling fueled a construction boom, but it was a city built on sand. The wealth wasn't creating a healthy, sustainable society. It was enriching a handful of crime families while trapping thousands of people in modern slavery. The UN estimated that at its peak, over 100,000 foreign nationals were being held and forced to work in these scam centers in Myanmar alone, with Laokai as the epicenter. The scale of the operation was mind-boggling. This criminal enterprise didn't just target victims online, it consumed the very town it occupied. The streets were patrolled by men loyal to the crime families, not the police. Justice was whatever the bosses decided it was. The city became a symbol of the dark side of globalization, a place where technology, porous borders, and unchecked greed created a perfect storm of exploitation. Laokai wasn't just a location, it was a business model, a terrifying blueprint for how to build a city dedicated solely to industrial-scale crime. It was the Disneyland of Deception, where the only ride was a downward spiral into despair. Life for the workers trapped inside the Ming family's compounds was a living hell, and no place was more infamous than their main complex, known as Crouching Tiger Villa. This wasn't a luxury resort, it was a high-security prison that reportedly held at least 10,000 workers at a time. The name itself sounds like something out of a martial arts movie, but the reality was far more grim. Workers were confined to crowded dormitories, stripped of their freedom, and subjected to a routine of constant work and fear. Their only connection to the outside world was through the scams they were forced to perpetrate. The conditions inside were horrific. Survivors have told stories of routine beatings, torture, and starvation for those who didn't meet their scamming quotas or tried to resist. Guards would use electric batons, solitary confinement, and other brutal methods to maintain control. The goal was to break their spirits and ensure complete compliance. Imagine being forced to trick innocent people out of their life savings, knowing that if you fail, you'll be physically punished. It was a cycle of psychological and physical abuse designed to turn victims into perpetrators, all for the profit of the Ming family. The violence wasn't just a threat, it was a deadly reality. The court later found that the syndicate was directly responsible for the deaths of at least 10 scam center workers. In one particularly chilling incident, a group of workers who were trying to escape and return to China were caught and shot by the family's enforcers. This act of extreme violence sent a clear message to everyone else trapped inside. There is no escape. You either work for us, or you die. The fear was a powerful tool that kept the massive operation running smoothly, ensuring the flow of billions of dollars into the family's pockets. The impact of this extended far beyond the walls of Crouching Tiger Villa. The scams themselves were devastating lives across the globe. Families lost their entire savings, elderly people were tricked out of their pensions, and countless individuals were left financially and emotionally shattered. The UN estimates that the Southeast Asian scam industry as a whole causes over $43 billion in annual losses. Every dollar of that represents a story of personal tragedy, a life turned upside down by the calculated cruelty of groups like the Ming family. The human cost was immense, paid by both the people trapped in the scam centers and the victims they were forced to defraud. For a while, it really seemed like the scam operations in Laokang were just this unstoppable force. But, the tide began to turn when the Chinese government decided it had had enough. The problem had just grown way too big to ignore. A huge number of the trafficked workers were actually Chinese citizens, and an even larger number of the scam victims were also in China. The situation was becoming a major source of public anger and, honestly, a national security concern. Stories of citizens being trapped and tortured just across the border were flooding Chinese social media, putting immense pressure on Beijing to act decisively. The Chinese government, known for its emphasis on stability and control, simply couldn't tolerate a massive, violent criminal enterprise run by its own nationals, preying on its own people, right on its doorstep. It was a direct challenge to its authority and its image as a global power that protects its citizens. So, in 2023, Beijing launched a massive crackdown, signaling that the party was over for the Ming family and their associates. They started by issuing public warnings, telling their citizens to avoid the region and urging those involved to turn themselves in. This was, in a sense, the opening shot in a war against the scam syndicates. The crackdown wasn't just about stern words, though. China began using its immense political and economic leverage over Myanmar. They put intense pressure on the Myanmar military junta, which had previously been turning a blind eye, and in some cases, even actively collaborating with the crime families. Beijing made it clear that continued cooperation on other fronts depended on their help in dismantling these scam centers. This diplomatic squeeze was crucial, as it started to isolate the crime families from their powerful protectors within the Myanmar government, leaving them more vulnerable than ever before. Then, in November 2023, China took a dramatic and public step. They issued arrest warrants for key members of the Ming family, including the patriarch, Ming. This was a direct declaration of war. By putting their faces on wanted posters and broadcasting it to the world, Beijing was sending an unmistakable message. You can't hide anymore. This move electrified the region and set the stage for the family's eventual downfall. It showed that China was willing to reach across its border, one way or another, to bring these crime lords to justice. The game had changed, and the Mings were now officially fugitives. Just as China was turning up the heat, another major event completely changed the game on the ground. In late 2023, a powerful coalition of ethnic rebel groups, known as the Three Brotherhood Alliance, launched a massive military offensive against the Myanmar army in the northern part of the country. Their stated goal was to root out the scam centers and liberate the region from the control of both the military junta and the crime families. This offensive, codenamed Operation 1027, was surprisingly effective, and it swept through the region with incredible speed, putting Laokang directly in its sights. Now, here's where things get interesting. Many analysts believe that China tacitly approved, or at least turned a blind eye to, this rebel offensive. Why? Because the rebels were doing exactly what Beijing wanted: dismantling the scam empires that the Myanmar junta had failed to control. The alliance was effectively acting as China's proxy army in the fight against cybercrime. As the rebel forces closed in on Laokang, the crime families, including the Mings, found themselves trapped between the advancing rebels and the angry superpower across the border. Their local protection had evaporated, and their criminal fortress was about to crumble. Faced with imminent defeat, the Myanmar authorities in the area quickly changed their tune. To appease Beijing, they began arresting the very people they had been protecting. In a swift series of events, members of the Ming family were rounded up. The patriarch, Ming reportedly took his own life while in custody in Myanmar, avoiding the fate that awaited the rest of his family. His son, Ming Guoping, his daughter, Ming Julan, and his granddaughter, Ming Zhenzhen, all key figures in the criminal enterprise, were arrested and promptly handed over to Chinese authorities at the border. The once untouchable family was now in handcuffs. This handover was a huge victory for China. It demonstrated the long reach of its law enforcement and its ability to project power beyond its borders to protect its interests. The fall of Laokang also led to a mass exodus and repatriation. As the scam compounds were dismantled, over 53,000 Chinese nationals, a mix of trafficked victims and suspected criminals, were sent back to China. The city that was once the capital of cybercrime had fallen, and the masterminds behind its biggest operation were finally on their way to face justice in a Chinese courtroom.
Perfect.
The trial of the Ming family syndicate was one of the most high-profile cases in China in recent years. It wasn't just about punishing a few criminals, it was about making a powerful statement. The trial took place at the Wenzhou Intermediate People's Court, and on September 29, 2025, the court delivered its verdict to 39 members of the crime ring. The prosecution laid out a mountain of evidence detailing the family's vast criminal empire, which they had operated with impunity for nearly a decade. The charges were severe, ranging from organizing and leading a criminal organization to murder, kidnapping, fraud, and illegal detention. The court proceedings revealed the sheer brutality of the Ming family's operations. Prosecutors presented evidence of the torture and abuse inside the Crouching Tiger villa, including testimony from former captives and digital evidence of the scams. The most damning evidence centered on the murders of at least 10 workers who had tried to flee. The court heard how the family's enforcers had gunned down escapees to instill terror in the remaining workforce. These details painted a picture not just of a criminal enterprise, but of a deeply sadistic organization that treated human life as disposable. The defendants included the surviving leaders of the Ming clan, Ming Guoping, the son, Ming Julan, the daughter, and Ming Zhenjin, the granddaughter. They were accused of being the masterminds who directed the entire operation, from managing the finances to ordering punishments. The prosecution argued that they were directly responsible for the empire's crimes and showed no remorse for the suffering they had caused. The trial was a moment of reckoning, where the victims, both those trapped in the compounds and those scammed from afar, finally had their stories heard in a court of law. The case was also significant because it coincided with another major anti-corruption event in China. Just a day before the Ming family verdict, a former Minister of Agriculture, Tang Rinjian, was sentenced to death with a reprieve for massive bribery. While the cases were separate, their timing sent a powerful message from Beijing. No one is above the law, whether you are a corrupt high-ranking official within the government or a notorious crime boss operating on the border. It was a demonstration of the state's power and its commitment, at least publicly, to rooting out crime and corruption wherever it finds it. When the judge finally read the sentences, the severity of the punishment sent shockwaves through the region. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. The Wenzhou court handed down 11 death sentences, the ultimate penalty, for the principal members of the syndicate who were found guilty of the most heinous crimes, including murder. Another 5 members received a death sentence with a 2-year suspension, a sentence that is often commuted to life in prison if the individual shows good behavior. This was a clear sign that the court held them directly responsible for the loss of life and the extreme violence that defined their operation. The remaining members of the syndicate also received harsh punishments. 11 individuals were sentenced to life in prison, ensuring they would never again walk free. The rest of the 39 defendants were given prison terms, ranging from a stiff 5 years to a lengthy 24 years, depending on their level of involvement in the criminal enterprise. The court made a clear distinction between the leaders who orchestrated the crimes and the lower-level members who carried them out. But even the foot soldiers faced significant jail time. The verdict was a comprehensive dismantling of the entire Ming family hierarchy. The sentences against the Ming family members themselves were particularly severe, as the surviving leaders of the clan, Ming Guoping, Ming Julan, and Ming Zhenjin, were among those who received the harshest penalties. The court concluded that their leadership role made them culpable for the entire spectrum of the syndicate's crimes, from the financial devastation of the scams to the brutal murders of workers. The verdict effectively ended the Ming dynasty of crime, stripping them of their freedom and ensuring their names would be associated not with power, but with imprisonment and death. Ultimately, the trial and the sentences were designed to send a powerful message to other criminal groups operating in Southeast Asia. The message was simple: China is watching, and it will not tolerate these operations any longer. By imposing the death penalty, Beijing demonstrated its zero-tolerance policy for crimes that harm its citizens, even when those crimes are committed across the border. It was a warning to the other 4 families and any other aspiring crime lords that the rules have changed, and the consequences for running these scam centers have become deadly serious. So, the Ming family is done, Laogang has been cleaned out, and justice has been served. Problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. While the takedown of the Ming syndicate was a massive victory, it hasn't ended the scamdemic. It's more like a game of whack-a-mole. You smash one scam center, and 2 more pop up somewhere else. The criminal networks that run these operations are incredibly resilient and adaptable. They've learned from the fall of raking and are already changing their tactics to stay ahead of law enforcement. Many of these scam operations have simply relocated. Instead of concentrating in one high-profile town like raking, they have dispersed to other remote parts of Myanmar, as well as to countries like Cambodia and Laos, where law enforcement is weak and corruption is still a major issue. These new hubs are often smaller and more decentralized, making them harder to track and dismantle. The business model is just too profitable to abandon, so the criminals are playing a cat-and-mouse game with authorities, constantly shifting their bases of operation to avoid another large-scale crackdown. The scammers are also getting smarter with their technology. They are increasingly using cryptocurrency to move money, making it much more difficult for authorities to trace the illicit funds. They are also leveraging artificial intelligence, or AI, to make their scams more convincing and to automate parts of their operations. This allows them to target more people with fewer workers, making their business model even more efficient. The technological arms race between the criminals and law enforcement is escalating, and the scammers are proving to be quick learners. So, while the fall of the Ming family is a significant chapter in the fight against cybercrime, the story is far from over. The crackdown has shown that coordinated international action can work, as seen in recent efforts between China and Thailand that freed over 7,000 workers. However, as long as there are unstable regions with weak governance in Southeast Asia, these criminal enterprises will find a place to thrive. The challenge for the future will be to maintain international pressure, share intelligence, and address the root causes of corruption and poverty that allow these scam centers to exist in the first place. The battle is won, but the war continues.